I remember thinking the worst part would be hearing the word cancer. Turns out I was wrong. It was what came after. It was a Wednesday morning, crisp but not cold. Spring in Illinois always tried to act tougher than it was. I'd left work early for a checkup. Nothing alarming, just fatigue that didn't go away, discomfort that kept me up at night. As a third-grade teacher, being tired was part of the job, but something felt different. The exam was routine until it wasn't. Blood work, imaging, silence that lasted a bit too long. When the doctor walked back in with the nurse, she wasn't smiling. "Zelia, it's a small tumor on your liver. Early stage. We caught it in time, but we'll need to operate." I blinked, but didn't react. She kept talking. Outpatient surgery, good prognosis, 2 to 3 days in the hospital, a few weeks recovery. I nodded. I think I even thanked her. It wasn't until I got to my car that my hands started to shake. My fingers hovered over my phone for longer than they should have. Finally, I sent a message to the family group chat. "Hey, just saw the doctor, liver cancer, surgery scheduled next week. We'll need a few days in the hospital and someone with me for recovery." Within seconds, the chat bubble popped up. "Mom, Marigold." I opened the message and read, "We've got the Vegas trip. You go to surgery alone." No punctuation, no question, just that. I stared at the screen. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe she hit send by mistake. I waited. Nothing else came. I read it again and again. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't say she was sorry or scared. She didn't say anything at all except, "You go to surgery alone." My phone rang. I thought, hoped, it was her trying to fix it, but no. "Zelia, did you remember to lock the back gate?" Mom's voice was sharp, distracted. "Your dad swears it was left wide open." I said nothing. She kept talking. "Right, liver something. You'll be fine. Young bodies bounce back. Anyway, I told your sister to get the margarita mix for the room." She hung up before I said a word. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. The silence sat beside me in the passenger seat like a smug ghost. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles cracked. My mind didn't go to the surgery. It went backwards. The ballet recital she missed because of a book club. The birthday where I ate store-bought cake alone while they went to dinner, just the three of us, because it was Dad's favorite place, and I didn't like seafood. It wasn't about Vegas. It wasn't about the trip. It was the choice. They didn't forget me. They chose not to show up. When I got home, I went to pour myself a glass of water. I paused. My hands were still trembling. I set the glass down before it shattered. Then I opened my phone again, just to make sure I hadn't hallucinated. There it was. Her text, plain as day. I clicked into the group chat. The name had been changed. 2 days ago, I realized. Vegas Countdown. I hadn't noticed then, probably just thought it was one of those cutesy seasonal things Mom liked to do. But now it felt like branding. I scrolled up. Not a single response from Oren. Thessaly had just sent a gif of slot machines spinning. I was wallpapered in my own family's celebration. Maybe I wasn't forgotten. Maybe I was never truly remembered. I started typing a message. "Got it. My emergency contact will be someone who actually shows up." I hovered over the send button, then backspaced, then typed it again, then saved it to drafts. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My phone buzzed. Another message in the group. A photo this time. They were all gathered at a restaurant, laughing over margaritas. The caption read, "Planning dinner for our epic trip. Family first. Family first." I turned off the screen and set the phone face down. I sat down on the couch and let the silence wrap around me. I wasn't crying. Not yet. It was too deep for that. I was calculating, measuring, adjusting. Because something broke inside me that night, and not in the tragic, poetic way people describe in movies. It was cleaner, quieter, more like a lock clicking shut from the inside. Morning sunlight poured through the slats of my kitchen blinds, spilling stripes across the table like reminders that the world kept turning, whether I liked it or not. I sat in my usual spot, a chipped mug of coffee in my hand, lukewarm from being reheated twice. I didn't taste it. I wasn't drinking for flavor. I just needed something to hold that didn't feel like an empty hand. I opened my phone and scrolled to the message. The one my mother had sent, I hadn't deleted it. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me still wanted to believe it didn't mean what it clearly did. We've got the Vegas trip. You go to surgery alone. I stared at it, not for the words, but for what wasn't there. No follow-up, no typo, no accidental send, just a full sentence with the weight of 100 other ones they never bothered to say. When someone stays gone long enough, you start crafting excuses in your head, tiny soft lies to cushion the fall. But eventually, even the lie gets tired of holding the truth back. I opened the family group chat again, this time noticing something I'd missed. The name of the group had changed. Vegas Countdown. It had happened 2 days ago, the same day I got my diagnosis. Not one message, not a single, "How are you?" Not even a thumbs-up emoji pretending to care. Just that name, that cocktail emoji, and a few image replies to hotel confirmations. It wasn't just about being left out. It was about being erased without anyone thinking twice. I put the phone down and walked over to my bedroom. My closet was open, half-organized chaos. I knelt and pulled a small, dusty jewelry box from the back of the shelf. Inside, nestled between old church lockets and forgotten earrings, was the tiny silver necklace I wore as a girl. Or at least what was left of it. 5 years ago, I sold that necklace. Not because I needed the money, but because Oren did. He was short on tuition for his final semester, and our parents said they had nothing to give. He called me, desperate. I didn't hesitate. I pawned the one thing I had from Grandma Ruth that hadn't yet been claimed or dismissed as sentimental clutter. He thanked me, of course. I remember his exact words. "You're the only one who shows up." I scrolled through our messages now, found that exact thread. The bubble hovered in the screen like a ghost, and just below it, my recent message about my cancer, still marked as seen, without a reply. I used to believe that love, real love, had a gravitational pull, like a boomerang. You send it out, and eventually, it circles back. But now I think some people let it drop the second it leaves your hand. Back in the kitchen, I leaned on the counter and stared at the wall. Not at anything in particular. My brain was already shuffling through moments that I thought were small, moments that now felt like breadcrumbs I'd ignored. Thanksgiving 2 years ago, me in the kitchen, washing dishes alone while Mom and Thessaly took selfies by the dining table. The caption read, "3 generations of strong women." I wasn't in the frame. I never was. That invisible thread, the one I thought tied us all together, wasn't fraying. It had never been real. I didn't touch my phone again for hours. Calls from unknown numbers rolled to voicemail. I wasn't in the mood to pretend I didn't know who they were from. Instead, I pulled out an old journal. Not the kind with quotes and affirmations, just lined paper and ink that didn't smudge. I titled the page, "What I See Now." It wasn't about documenting symptoms or doctor visits. It was about clarity. About naming what had been hiding in plain sight for decades. First line, "They didn't abandon me during my illness. They just stopped pretending." I kept writing. When the sun dipped behind the neighbor's garage and shadows stretched across the linoleum, I opened the group chat one more time. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. I typed, "Don't worry about updates. There won't be any." And then I hit delete. Not just the message, the entire thread, the entire group. It was never about the surgery. It was never about the logistics. It was about presence and absence. And finally realizing that showing up isn't just about proximity. It's about choosing someone, especially when it's inconvenient. They'd already chosen each other. I was just catching up. The morning after I deleted the family group chat, the quiet in my house felt heavier than usual. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. The kitchen was still clean from the night before, but the stillness lingered like a thick coat. My coffee sat untouched again, not because I forgot it, but because it just didn't matter anymore. Some silences last longer than entire conversations, and some way more. Nissa knocked just after 8. She didn't ask to come in, she just walked through the door like she had every right to. And maybe she did. She held a thermos and a grocery bag. "Brought real coffee and some of those muffins you pretend not to like," she said, setting them down. You okay? I nodded. You don't need to babysit me. She sat across from me anyway. I'm not. I'm just not the kind of person who pretends someone's fine when they're clearly not. That stopped me. I didn't say anything, but I looked up. She waited a moment, then asked, Do you want me to drive you to the pre-op appointment next week? I hesitated. I can handle it, I said. She didn't push. Instead, she looked down at her coffee and said something that clamped around my ribs like a vice. Your mom told me once, not long after you moved back, that I shouldn't coddle you. Said you were too sensitive for your own good. I felt the words land, sharp but not surprising. It wasn't shock. It was confirmation. I smiled, but it was more muscle memory than emotion. Of course she did. Nissa leaned forward. Zelia, she made it sound like being kind to you was a weakness. I nodded again, this time slower. It wasn't just you. That's always been the script. I was the problem. The one too soft to handle the real world. The one who took things personally. She looked sad and I hated that. Not for me. For her. That she had to carry this memory until now. I stood up and grabbed a muffin, mostly to do something with my hands. Thanks for telling me, really. Later that afternoon, I walked the perimeter of my yard with my phone in my back pocket, earbuds dangling from my sweatshirt. I wasn't listening to anything. The silence was enough. 2 days ago, I'd gotten a call from my father. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone, not even Nissa. The words still sat bitter on my tongue. You'll be fine, he'd said, in that casual tone he reserved for car trouble or a leaky faucet. Get the surgery, then come out to Vegas. You could use some fun. I remembered standing in my hallway, frozen, trying to decide if I should scream or laugh. You make it sound like I'm getting a root canal, not removing a tumor from my liver. But I hadn't said anything. Just held the phone and waited for him to finish his script. Because that's what it was. A script. One that didn't require me to be a person. Just a placeholder for their story. My illness wasn't a crisis. It was a conflict with their calendar. I didn't respond to Thessaly's Instagram tag either. She'd posted a picture at brunch with the caption, Family Vibes Only. It featured Mom, Oren, and her, all dressed to the nines, mimosas in hand. I wasn't tagged in the photo. I was tagged in the comments. Wish Zelia could be here. Right? That wasn't anger I felt. It was subtraction. As if I'd already walked out of a room I was never really in. I opened my messages to my mom later that night. I started typing. I need you to hear how much this hurts. Delete. I spent years trying to be enough for this family. Delete. I closed the app and opened my journal. They always meant well, I wrote. But meaning well isn't the same as being there. And being there doesn't mean showing up when it's easy. On the wall above my desk, I taped a printout of a quote I'd saved months ago but never had the guts to hang. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave the room. Oprah Winfrey. I left the house the next morning to grab groceries, and when I returned, Nisa was sitting on my porch swing. She stood as I walked up. I meant what I said. I'll go with you to the pre-op if you want. I unlocked the door, didn't answer immediately. I'll think about it. She nodded, then added quietly, You shouldn't have to do that alone. Later that night, after I brushed my teeth and climbed into bed, I stared at the ceiling for a long time before grabbing my phone. I opened my voicemail app and hit record. My voice was even, flat, but certain. Hi, this is Zelia Conrad. I'd like to update my emergency contact information and revise the power of attorney forms we filed last year. A pause. I swallowed, not from emotion, but from decision. Please remove Marigold Conrad. Replace with Nissa Lane. I waited a second, then added, No one who didn't show up gets to speak for me anymore. Wednesday, midweek, always carried a strange stillness in Peoria, like the world was holding its breath for something that wouldn't come. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair into a neat ponytail, rehearsing lines I didn't want to say out loud. If she calls, I'll keep it short. If he texts, I won't answer. If they show up, I'll set the terms. But they wouldn't, and that's why the lines mattered more than the script. My phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't a call. It was a notification. Facebook. I clicked it, out of habit. It was a live video from Aunt Maggie's birthday dinner. I recognized the restaurant immediately. White walls, string lights, mid-range overpriced cocktails. I watched the screen in silence. There she was, Marigold, laughing, waving at the camera, holding a wine glass like she was toasting a room full of people who thought she was warm and generous. Zelia couldn't make it, she said, voice saccharine. Probably busy with school. I didn't flinch, but my jaw tightened just enough for me to feel it later. No mention of the surgery, of the tumor, of anything real, just a brush-off, a placeholder excuse. Someone in the comments asked, "Isn't Zelia a teacher? Hope she's doing well." No one answered. They moved on, so did the camera. I took a screenshot and saved it to a folder I'd created the night before. I called it Receipts, not for vengeance, just for memory, because they weren't just absent, they were rewriting the narrative. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. Marigold's name flashed across the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I picked up. "Zelia," she said, already exasperated. "What's this message about not sending updates?" I didn't respond right away. Let her fill the silence. "You're making this bigger than it is. Honestly, the way you're acting, it's dramatic. We're under a lot of pressure planning this trip, and now you're acting like we abandoned you?" "Didn't you?" I asked. Silence. "I have cancer, Mom." "Yes, and it's early," she snapped. "Your doctor said it's treatable. You're not the only one dealing with things, you know. We all have lives." I felt a strange calm settle over me, like I'd stepped out of a storm and realized I was already soaked. "The only thing I ever asked from you," I said, voice even, "was to care when it mattered." "I do care," she shot back, defensive. "But you're making it impossible to help." I let her talk until she ran out of steam, then ended the call. No anger, no yelling, just done. Afterward, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my journal. I drew a line down the middle of the page and titled it, Tolerance Ledger. One column, what happened? The other, how I excused it. It filled fast. Forgotten birthdays. Missed graduations. The time they left me stranded at the airport because Thessaly had an emotional emergency. Every entry was a reminder, not of malice, but of neglect. Families aren't built on blood, they're built on behavior. That night, just before bed, my phone dinged again. A text from Marigold. "Since we can't be there, maybe ask Nissa to take you to surgery?" No apology, no acknowledgement, just the casual outsourcing of responsibility. I stared at it for a long time, then replied with a single word. Noted. I opened my laptop and logged into the patient portal. I updated my emergency contact, removed Marigold, added Nissa. Then I opened the power of attorney forms and began drafting an email to my attorney. I'd given them space, I'd given them chances, I'd given them grace. Now I was giving them distance. The next morning, Nissa and I sat on her porch with cups of tea and silence between us. It wasn't heavy, it was shared. "I thought being family meant being there," I said, eyes on the street. "Turns out it's just a title, and I'm revoking it." She nodded, didn't interrupt. My phone buzzed beside me. Another photo from the group chat. The four of them at dinner again, this time in Vegas-themed t-shirts holding plastic champagne flutes. Caption, "Getting ready to roll." I didn't open it. I took a slow sip of tea and set the cup down. "It's time," I said. The hospital paperwork was laid out across my kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle I no longer needed help solving. I reviewed every form, every signature line, every checkmark box. I wasn't nervous. Not about the surgery, at least. I was preparing for the other part, the quiet. The kind of silence that comes from knowing no one's coming. The room wouldn't be empty. It would just be full of truth. I checked my calendar, then opened the app the nurse had suggested for tracking pre-op diet. That's when I made the mistake of opening Instagram. Thessaly had posted a new story. The familiar curve of the Vegas hotel pool glistened behind our mother, who was lounging in a pink bikini with sunglasses and a frozen drink. The caption read, "Self-Care Week with the Best Mom." I stared at the screen, then looked down at the bowl of unsalted oatmeal in front of me. I was supposed to eat light, avoid fats, no caffeine, just plain food, bland and clean. I pushed the bowl away. Apparently, self-care meant different things to different people. To them, it meant escape. To me, it meant facing the truth alone in a paper gown. The world's full of people who tell you to take care of yourself while they celebrate their own neglect. There was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a hospital volunteer holding a modest bouquet wrapped in plastic. She smiled politely. "Delivery for a... Celine?" I blinked. "Zelia." She glanced at the card and hesitated. This says Celine, wishing you strength through recovery. Love, your family." She handed it over anyway. I took the bouquet and shut the door gently, not out of anger, just exhaustion. I looked at the card again. Celine. Not even close. When people confuse your name, they confuse your worth. They forget you're a person with a body, a diagnosis, a need. I dropped the bouquet in the trash, petals first. The stems stuck out like they were reaching for a different ending. Afterward, I recorded a voice message to my mother. My tone was firm, measured. "I will not apologize for needing support, and I will not beg for it either." The message was just under a minute. I listened back to it once, then hit send, no response. She left it on read. I didn't expect her to respond. At least now she heard the version of me that wasn't asking anymore. The next day, I walked into the hospital with my tote bag, insurance card, and decision already made. I met with the patient advocate in a neutral-toned office that smelled faintly of Lysol and worn coffee filters. She smiled kindly. "Updating your medical proxy, Ms. Conrad?" I nodded. "Yes, removing Marigold Conrad, adding Nissa Lane." She clicked her mouse, then asked softly, "Any particular reason?" I looked her in the eye and said, "It's not personal, it's protective." She nodded. No judgment, just understanding. That's what I appreciated most, how the legal system, unlike my family, didn't try to gaslight me into questioning my choices. As I walked out of her office, paperwork in hand, I paused by the nurse's station and glanced out the window. The sun was too bright, too careless. I passed a bulletin board with notes from patients thanking the staff. I didn't leave a note. Instead, I walked to the back of the building where the dumpsters sat behind a tall wooden fence. I reached into my bag and pulled out the wilted bouquet, Celine's bouquet. I placed it on top of the trash bin gently. No drama, no ceremony. "That name wasn't mine," I said under my breath. "That love wasn't either." Walking back inside, I felt the weight of the documents in my bag. Among them, a DNR form, signed. This wasn't about giving up. It was about choosing. When I reached my room, I looked at the nurse and said, "Let me know when we're ready." She smiled. "You're early." I returned the smile. "I know." And as I settled into the chair by the window, I whispered to myself, "I'm ready now." The day before surgery, I found myself in an office that smelled like disinfectant and old carpet, neutral beige walls, humming printer, a desk too clean to feel real. I sat across from the hospital administrator as she scrolled through my file. Her tone was kind, almost motherly, which made it easier and harder at the same time. "So we'll update your medical proxy," she said, clicking through the digital form. "We're removing Marigold Conrad and adding Nissa Lane?" "Yes," I said. No hesitation, no qualifiers, just yes. She looked up briefly, maybe checking if there was a story behind it. I gave her nothing. "I used to think paperwork was cold," I said quietly, more to myself than to her. "Now I see it for what it is. Power." She didn't respond, just kept typing. Maybe she'd heard something like that before. Maybe not. I signed the screen, then stood, nodded politely, and left. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt precise. I stopped by the billing office before leaving the wing. I'd received an automated reminder about verifying insurance, and since I was already there, I figured I'd deal with it now. The clerk, a woman named Patty with glasses perched halfway down her nose, gave me a hesitant smile. "There's a note on your account," she said, pulling up my chart. The card on file, under Marigold Conrad, was declined 3 times. I blinked. Patty continued, almost apologetically. We paused the chart update, waiting for confirmation. I'm sorry, we should have called. Of course they didn't call. They didn't expect me to care. She put her name down just to look involved, I said, voice calm. She never intended to pay. I pulled out my own card. Use this, and remove her name entirely from anything financial. Patty nodded and took the card. I watched the machine accept it without issue. There's a special kind of cruelty in pretending to show up on paper. By the time I got back home, I was drained, but not from the hospital, just from the weight of the layers, the rehearsed performances, the illusion of involvement, the optics of concern. None of it held anymore. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the dining table, and opened my voicemail. It was Oren. Hey Z, just wanted to say hang in there. It's just a rough patch. You'll bounce back. You're young, strong. We believe in you. I paused the message halfway through. Do you even know what stage they diagnosed me at? He didn't. I knew he didn't. I knew because I had told him, and it still hadn't registered. Because to them, I was a concept, the sick one, not a person. Encouragement without context is just noise. I opened the voice recorder app on my phone and started talking, not to anyone in particular, just for me. They want me to survive, but not to be inconvenient, I said. They want a recovery arc without the messy middle. I saved the clip and started a folder titled Journal Spoken. That night, I was moved into my hospital room. Cassiel, the nurse, greeted me with a clipboard and a warm, tired smile. She checked my chart, then glanced over the paper again. You've been assigned to the Willow Wing, she said. Low-visit patients. Quieter. It's usually for people who don't have company, I finished. She looked hesitant. Would you prefer to request a transfer? I thought for a moment, then shook my head. No need. I belong here more than I ever belonged in that group chat. Cassiel didn't push. She helped me settle in and left the room with a nod. The walls were pale blue. The lighting was soft. I placed my phone face down on the tray table. I didn't want to see it light up again. The next morning, while waiting for pre-op blood work, I received an automated email from the hospital system. Confirmation. Payment received. Remaining balance 0. Source Z. Conrad. Personal savings account. Below it was a scanned receipt. At the bottom, next of kin, NA. I stared at those 3 letters. NA. Not applicable, not attached, not anyone. That's accurate, I said out loud. Then I opened my journal and wrote it on the top of a new page. That's accurate, then just below. But not final. The morning of the procedure, I checked into the hospital without ceremony. Just a clipboard, 2 signatures, and a nurse asking the same question they always ask. Any family expected to arrive? I didn't even pause. Not the kind that shows up. The nurse gave a polite smile and nodded, like she heard that more often than she should. She didn't ask anything else. They led me to pre-op. Gown, IV, standard prep. The lights overhead were soft, but the air had a sterility to it that made everything feel distant. Cassiel came in to check my vitals, her energy calm like always. Familiar, but not intrusive. I appreciated that. While she adjusted the IV, I glanced at my phone. My nephew had posted something on Facebook. Normally, I would have ignored it, but I saw Marigold's face in the thumbnail and opened it anyway. A picture. Poolside. Marigold and Oren, arms around each other, drinks in hand, smiles stretching wide under the Las Vegas sun. The caption read, "Best trip ever." Grandpa and Grandma are the best. I didn't feel the sting I thought I would. What I felt was deeper. Not just being left out, I'd been erased. Comments rolled in. Such a beautiful family. So close-knit. Love this. Close-knit. Tight circle. Perfect optics. I was on a hospital bed with a vein in my arm and a DNR form signed in my bag. And they were collecting compliments like they were currency. Cassiel came back to review the schedule. She paused by the door. You have someone listed as Nissa Lane for support contact. Should we call her if anything changes? Yes, I said firmly. Not the others. Not anyone else. She nodded again and left. 20 minutes later, she returned with a hesitant expression. Someone came by, said she knew you, asked if she could say hello before surgery. I blinked. Who? Cassiel looked at her notes. Rebecca McGill? Says she worked with you at the elementary school? My chest tightened slightly. Yeah, Becca? That's fine. She stepped in a moment later, eyes scanning the room before landing on me. She looked confused, almost stunned. Oh, Zelia, she breathed, walking to the side of the bed. I assumed, well, I figured your mom or sister would be here. I gave her a soft smile. Everyone figured that? She shook her head. I just can't believe you're doing this alone. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She stayed for 5 minutes, held my hand, said nothing judgmental, nothing invasive. Just warmth. You're stronger than most, she whispered before she left. But you shouldn't have to be. The truth was, she wasn't wrong. And that's what made the next part easier. Sometime later, when the pre-op room was empty again, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Thessaly. I didn't even listen all the way through. The preview told me enough. Why are you making this harder than it has to be? You could have at least told us how to help. No apology. Just revisionist blame. I deleted it without opening it. You can't guilt-trip someone who's no longer on your path. The surgery went as planned. 2 hours. No complications. I woke up groggy but clear-headed enough to notice the light shifting across the window. Cassiel was at the edge of the bed when I opened my eyes. Everything went smoothly, she said, voice even. You'll stay overnight. Nissa called. She's planning to visit in the evening. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. She handed me my phone. Been buzzing a lot. Figured you'd want to see it. I opened the lock screen. Another photo. Marigold, Thessaly, and Oren, now dressed up for a dinner show. Sequins. Showgirls in the background. Marigold held up a sign that read, Making Memories That Matter. My thumb hovered over the image. I didn't react, just stared. I made memories too. Alone. I rested the phone on my chest, turned my head slightly, and stared out the window. The ache in my side was nothing compared to the clarity in my mind. Later that afternoon, as I slowly sipped on hospital ginger ale and broth, I typed one message in the family chat. Surgery complete. No emojis, no warmth, just data. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Nothing. Cassiel checked in again and noticed me glancing at the screen. Anyone? Reach out? She asked, carefully. No, I said, setting the phone face down again. Don't expect them. I don't anymore. She didn't push, just adjusted my blanket. I closed my eyes for a moment, not from exhaustion, but because something had finally settled. They had their trip. I had my turning point. The morning after surgery, I woke to the sound of machines humming softly and the warmth of sunlight creeping across the wall. My body felt heavy, but my mind was alert. Cassiel stood at the foot of the bed, clipboard in hand. Vitals are good, she said with a faint smile. You'll feel groggy for a while. That's normal. I nodded and cleared my throat. Can I have my phone? She handed it to me carefully. It's been buzzing all night. I unlocked the screen. 43 unread messages. Now they cared. Funny how silence ends when guilt begins. I scrolled through them with steady fingers. Thessaly, Oren, even Marigold. Most were generic. Thinking of you. Hope everything went okay. Let us know when we can call. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened my email. There it was. An email from my tax consultant flagged as important. Subject line, unusual filing pattern found under dependent care. Inside, a copy of last year's tax documents. My brother Oren had listed me as a dependent to claim a deduction, under the guise of providing support for a medically vulnerable adult. It had been processed. Refund granted. I stared at the screen. So I was too much to help, but good enough to claim. I forwarded the email to my attorney with one line. We move forward. File everything. By noon, the papers were signed. A formal notice was delivered to Oren and Marigold, citing misuse of identity and intentional neglect of a dependent family member. Thessaly messaged the group chat moments later. What are you doing, Zelia? Can we talk? This doesn't have to go legal. I replied once. Tell your lawyer to talk to mine. That was the last time I typed in that thread. For once, the silence was on their side. Cassiel came in mid-afternoon to check my IV and noticed the shift in my tone, my eyes. "What's going on?" she asked softly. I told her. About the taxes, the messages, the notice. She blinked. Most people just cry. "And you're the first I've seen fight back while still in the recovery ward." "I'm not crying anymore," I said. "That phase is done." By evening, Nissa stopped by to drop off a fresh change of clothes and a few things from my apartment. Along with it, a folder she'd found tucked behind some old file boxes. "I wasn't snooping," she said. "I just didn't want the landlord to toss anything while you were here." Inside the folder, yellowed and creased, was an old will. Dated 8 years ago. My name was listed first, primary heir. It was signed by both my parents. The date struck me. It was before the Vegas priority era, before they began rewriting the hierarchy of our family, like I'd never been the daughter who showed up first, stayed quiet longest, and paid the price most. The emotional distance hadn't started with the cancer. It had been seeded in ink long before they decided to leave me behind. That night, while lying in the low-lit hospital room, my phone buzzed again. "We need to talk," Thessaly texted. "The family's freaking out." I stared at the message, then typed back, "I'll talk," in a place where things are recorded and under oath, and then I turned my phone over and let it rest on the table. They wanted control. They forgot I still had truth. Recovery felt less like healing and more like aftermath. I wasn't in pain, at least not the kind a nurse could chart. The ache sat deeper, quiet, stubborn, buried in places that had no medical code. Nissa brought me home the day after I was discharged. I didn't ask, she didn't offer, she just showed up. There was something about her quiet presence that felt more protective than any signature on a form. I spent most of the first 2 days on her couch, wrapped in a throw blanket, sipping weak coffee that neither of us had the heart to improve. The house was calm, low hum of the fridge, the occasional breeze rattling the window. Sometimes silence isn't peace, it's aftermath. I sat by the window with the old will Nissa had found tucked in a folder, the one listing me as the primary heir. My name, written in cursive ink, was once bold. Now it was lined through in blue pen. Someone had done it deliberately, not sloppily. The ink didn't run, didn't hesitate. It wasn't just a legal revision, it was proof. It told me everything I'd been afraid to admit. I hadn't been pushed aside during my diagnosis. I'd been quietly replaced years ago. I remembered a family meeting around the time that will was drawn up. I'd flown in from my job, sat at the table while Thessaly and Oren did most of the talking. I offered suggestions, solutions. Nobody heard me. At the time, I thought they were just distracted. Now I know. I wasn't part of the plan. I was just still in the room. A buzz pulled me out of that thought. My phone lit up with a message from Oren. "Can we talk? This is all too much." Too much. Interesting choice of words. I didn't reply. Another ping. Thessaly had posted a vague Instagram story, a black background, white text, betrayed by the ones you always tried to help. Subtle. Passive. Aimed like a dart without aim. I screenshotted it, like I'd done with everything else. They weren't sorry. They were scared. I powered off my phone, set it aside, picked up my journal, not to write about the pain. That part felt repetitive. Instead, I started a new list. Things I will no longer explain. Line 1. Why I walked away. I didn't get far before the doorbell rang. Nissa called from the kitchen. "Got it." A few minutes later, she stepped into the living room, holding a vase of wildflowers. "They're for you," she said, smiling. "From one of your old students' moms." There was a note attached. "Thank you for teaching kindness when no one showed it to you." It took a second to register. I hadn't seen that parent in over 2 years. Yet here she was, remembering me more clearly than my own mother. A soft beep from my phone. I almost ignored it, but the name caught my eye. Cassiel. Just a voice message. I clicked play. "Hey, Zelia. Just wanted to say, I've seen a lot of patients, a lot of families. But what you did, standing up for yourself like that stays with people like us." You didn't just survive, you showed us what boundaries look like in real time. I didn't cry, not because it didn't mean something, but because I didn't have to. I don't feel brave, I whispered to no one in particular. I just feel honest. That night, after Nissa had gone to bed and the house was bathed in a quiet only her porch light could touch, I sat on the edge of the guest bed and reread my journal entry. There was something healing about writing not from pain, but from decision. I heard movement on the porch, then a knock on the door. A firm, professional knock. I walked over slowly, wrapped in a blanket, and opened it to find a courier. "Zelia Conrad?" he asked. "Yes." He handed over a slim envelope, no return address, just my name. I thanked him, closed the door, opened it at the kitchen table. Inside, a new legal notice, but this time not from me, from the family attorney. I sat back in my chair and breathed deep through my nose. "So," I murmured, setting the paper down beside my journal, "they're making their move." The envelope was heavier than it should have been for something so slim, official letterhead, high-grade paper, the kind of document designed to intimidate before the ink is even read. I sat at Nissa's kitchen table with the morning sun casting uneven stripes across the floor, my tea barely touched. I opened the letter slowly, but I didn't hesitate. A cease and desist. They accused me of defamation, of damaging the family unit with my reckless legal escalation and causing emotional harm through unsubstantiated accusations. I read it twice, then a third time. They didn't want peace, I said aloud. They wanted control. Nissa looked up from the sink. "Is that from them?" I nodded. "Do you want me to?" "No," I said. "I've got it." By midday, I was sitting across from my attorney, Marla Hayes, a woman who never raised her voice but made grown men crumble in boardrooms. "They tried to erase me," I said, placing the letter between us. "Now they're scared I exist on paper." Marla adjusted her glasses, scanned the document, and gave a single nod. "We'll file a counterclaim, not for damages unless you want that, but to legally establish identity misuse and abandonment." "Not for money," I said. "Just truth, documented. So they can't spin this later." She didn't smile. She didn't need to. That afternoon, I checked my email while waiting on a call. One new message sat at the top of my inbox. It was from an old family friend, Aunt Linda, who always meant well, but never quite knew how to mind her own business. She'd accidentally forwarded me a string of messages between her and Thessaly, along with a PDF attachment that was clearly not meant for me. The file was a copy of a hotel receipt from Vegas. Line item, Family Getaway Fund, reimbursed via Conrad Trust account. I stared at the screen. I hadn't touched that account in years. It was set up by my grandfather and technically belonged to me. I just never fought over it. They had used it to pay for their trip. "So I funded the trip I wasn't invited to," I whispered. I forwarded it to Marla without comment. Nissa walked in with groceries. I didn't speak, just handed her the phone. She read the message, exhaled sharply, and said, "People always show you who they are when they think you won't look." The fallout began before the next sunrise. Nissa, never one for subtlety, posted a photo of the receipt, cropped, without names, but clear enough. Her caption read, "Don't cry family if you eat on her dime while she recovers alone." It took under 2 hours for the comments to pour in. Wait, wasn't her mom in Vegas while she was in surgery? Did they really use her own trust for that? This is what betrayal in pastel looks like. The narrative flipped on its head. People who'd once praised my mother's social posts started questioning everything. Some deleted their supportive comments. Others apologized to me publicly, which I ignored. Oren deleted his Facebook entirely. Thessaly locked her profile. Marigold didn't post a word, not even a quote or a Bible verse which she usually turned to when the walls closed in. I didn't comment, didn't clarify. I simply uploaded one screenshot. The receipt showing my name, the trust account, and the date. 3 days into my hospital stay. No caption, just facts. The shift was complete. That evening, I sat on the porch, phone face down beside me, when it rang. I answered only because the number wasn't saved. It was their lawyer. "Miss Conrad," he began, voice brittle, I'm calling to inform you the family is willing to settle, full retraction, no further action on their end, and they hope to move forward privately. I waited. Let the silence hang just long enough to make him squirm. I don't need a settlement, I said. I need it documented. In ink. With names. A pause. They're open to that, if it means closure. It's not foreclosure, I replied. It's so the next time they try to pretend, there's a record. Let's make it official, so they can't erase it again. A few days after the legal notice went through, I returned to my apartment for the first time since surgery. It was quiet, as expected. Not the kind of quiet that begged to be filled, but the kind that let you breathe. No banners, no casseroles in foil trays, just space, just stillness. Justice doesn't always feel victorious. Sometimes it feels like standing still while the world finally stops spinning. I set down my overnight bag, walked over to the kitchen counter, and opened the envelope with my hospital discharge papers. Folded in the back was a copy of my medical chart. I flipped through until I saw it again. Next of kin. N.A. This time, I didn't wince. I didn't circle it or annotate it or fold the page down with shaking hands. It wasn't a loss. It was a correction. Later that afternoon, I checked my email. I hadn't since the week before, and the inbox was cluttered with appointment reminders, statements, and one message titled, About Everything, from Thessaly. I opened it more out of curiosity than care. We didn't know how bad it was. We were trying our best. You should have said something. We're still family. I didn't reply. I didn't rage. I didn't even finish reading it. I clicked forward and sent it to a folder I had made just the week prior. Noise. Explaining isn't healing. Owning is. That evening, while I made a cup of herbal tea, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a bouquet of peonies, my favorite. The note was handwritten in neat cursive. Thank you for teaching our daughter that quiet strength is still strength. She told us you sat with her when she was too scared to raise her hand. Now we're sitting with you in spirit. No signature, but I remembered the handwriting. A parent from 2 years ago. I hadn't thought of her in forever. Later that night, Cassielle stopped by. She brought soup, not in a takeout container, but in a pot she insisted on reclaiming next week. She sat on my couch like it was her own and watched the last 15 minutes of the news without saying a word. Afterward, she turned to me and said, "You know what I've learned working in hospitals?" "What?" "No one who shows up for themselves stays alone forever." I believed her. The next morning, I sat at my desk, opened a new form, and typed in the names. Emergency contact, Nissa Lane. Secondary contact, Cassielle Monroe. I signed it, printed it, and slipped it into a folder labeled Life Documents. Then I opened my journal to the last page. I wrote in bold letters, "Family is earned, and mine? They're already here." Around noon, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in weeks. Marigold. I hesitated, pressed play on the voicemail. Zelia, if this is goodbye, at least let it be civil. That was as far as I let it play. I hit delete. They kept asking for closure like it was something I owed them. I'd already said goodbye. They just didn't hear it. It had been a week since I last heard from them. Not a call, not a knock, not even a subtweet. The quiet wasn't ominous this time. It was intentional, designed, and I welcomed it. Nissa and I sat on the porch that Sunday morning, legs stretched out toward the sloping street. She flipped through the paper while I held a certified letter still sealed. The envelope had arrived that morning, signature required, heavy with finality. I hadn't opened it yet. "Ready?" Nissa asked, eyes not leaving her crossword. "Been ready," I replied. But I didn't move. I let the envelope rest on my lap, warmed by sunlight. Closure doesn't arrive in envelopes. It arrives when you stop waiting for them. I finally peeled it open and read the retraction. We regret our lack of involvement in Zelia Conrad's medical crisis. We acknowledge the distress and harm our inaction caused. We retract any statements or implications that her claims were exaggerated or misleading. It was signed by Marigold. By Oren, by Thessaly. No emotion, no apology beyond what lawyers demanded. I picked up my phone, took a picture of the document, and posted it to my feed with one sentence: "Apologies don't rewrite history, they just admit you were never the author." By evening, the post had gone viral. Messages poured in, from old classmates, former students, distant acquaintances, even strangers. "Thank you for saying what so many of us are scared to. This isn't just your story, it's ours. You didn't burn the bridge, you just stopped patching it alone." I didn't respond to all of them. I didn't need to. The silence I once feared had become fertile ground. It was growing something new. The following afternoon, I visited Marla, my attorney, one last time. She was already seated, folder open. "I want out of everything," I told her. "All of it. Trusts, properties, any joint accounts with my last name on theirs." She leaned back in her chair. "You sure? You'd be walking away from—" "I'm not walking away," I cut in. "I'm stepping out. There's a difference." She scribbled something and said, "This is the most expensive freedom I've ever seen someone buy with silence." "I call it priceless," I said, signing the final page. The next day, I received a formal invitation to speak at a community wellness event. Topic: Rebuilding after estrangement. I declined the podium, but offered to help behind the scenes. A week later, Cassiel invited me to help facilitate a new grief group forming at the hospital for adults recovering from familial abandonment. I said yes. The first session was quiet, hesitant, but raw. In that room, I didn't tell them my story. I just listened. Until one man, maybe 50, asked, "But how do you forgive them?" I responded without flinching. Forgiveness isn't about letting them back in. It's about letting yourself out. That night, I returned home, feeling lighter than I had in years. I pulled out a cardboard box labeled "Hospital Files" and sat cross-legged in the living room. Inside were printed emails, voicemail transcripts, the DNR form, old insurance documents. I boxed them up, labeled them, and dropped them off the next day at a nonprofit that advocated for medical autonomy and legal protection for women. They didn't ask many questions, but a few weeks later, someone from their communications team reached out to ask if they could share my story anonymously on their podcast. I agreed, with one quote, recorded in my voice. They called me dramatic for having cancer. I called them out for abandoning me. It hit home harder than I expected. Women messaged me in droves, not with pity, but recognition. One afternoon, I came home to find a small white envelope in my mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Marigold. Inside, one line. "I don't understand how you became so strong without us." I stared at it, folded it. Walked into the backyard. I struck a match and watched the paper curl, blacken, and vanish in flame. "That's the part you never will," I whispered. "Some people inherit a legacy. I built one from scratch.